Hello and welcome to Prairie Pulse. Joining us on today's show is Adam Martin, the F5 project founder. Adam, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
As we get started, we always tell the folks a little bit about yourself and your background.
So I'm a 5-time felon turned entrepreneur. I guess that's kind of what the community has coined me as. Drug addict, alcoholic, felon, and then about 5, 6 years ago, got a job at a tech firm and built up sales and marketing skills and realized I already had those skills from the way that I was institutionalized and on the streets, and became successful. And then 2 years ago started a nonprofit.
Now, okay, there's so many questions I want to ask you there, but so what is the F5 project and why did you found it?
So the F5 project is a re-entry organization for people coming out of jail and prison. So specifically to people who are formerly incarcerated that have felony backgrounds, mainly because it's easy to discriminate against people with felonies when it comes to housing, employment. And so when they would get out of jail or prison, they would have nowhere to go, and that gap needed to be filled. So that wasn't the original idea when we started F5. I was just going to be an advocate, a speaker, and when people started approaching me needing a place to go, it was only common sense to try something.
Mm-hmm. So why the name F5?
I got 5 felonies on my background, and I just, the F5 key on the keyboard is the refresh key. And so the thought was, what would it look like if we just had unlimited grace, just push it whenever something happens and start over.
Now, so F5, where are you located? What communities are you working in?
We started in Fargo. In Fargo-Moorhead, we have 5 houses, and we have 1 house in Devil's Lake, 2 houses in Bismarck, and we're launching one on March 1st in Grand Forks.
Okay, so you're kind of across the state with that. So I understand you have 5 pillars. Mm-hmm. What are those 5?
Well, we came up with the pillars. It was more of a message to the community, what we think is important to any successful life. So that would be employment, transportation, recovery, healthy socialization, and there's a 5th one, and I always forget it.
Well, I don't know it, so it'll come to you in a minute, and you can add it.
Check the website.
You can add it to us. With that said, how long has the project been going, and how's it funded?
It's funded through private donations. You know, when I started F5, I got a lot of kickback on starting an organization that focuses on people with felony backgrounds. I was told you should make it about homelessness. You should make it about maybe start a nonprofit with kids with disabilities, or start it with dogs. But I don't. As much as those nonprofits are important, I don't have any experience in that, and so I just went forward with it. And we didn't have any funding when we started, and so we had to rely on social media to get the message out to like private individuals. And when I was watching other nonprofits go get these big donors, like they were getting $10,000 checks, $50,000 checks, I was just happy to get like a $20, online donation from somebody. And we just built that up, and that's really what's probably held F5 together and helped us continue with the momentum across the state.
Now, of course, I've listed you as a founder, but you keep saying we. Are there other people working with you?
Yeah, we have 5 employees in Fargo, 1 in Devil's Lake, 3 in Bismarck, and soon to have 2 in Grand Forks.
Are these felons also, or?
About 90% of them. There's one that used to be a cop. We don't hold it against him.
Okay. Well, let's talk about, you said, I believe 9 houses maybe. How many participants do you have?
There's 6 participants per house, so that's 9 times 6 is 54.
Okay. And do you have a waiting list, or?
Yeah, it's we try not to be all things to all people, right? Like we can't be everywhere at once. But I could really double every community's housing that we have right now, and I bet I could fill them up within the week.
Well, let's back up just a minute. Tell us a little bit more about your story, maybe your prison time and your road to recovery.
Yeah, so my mom and dad met in the military. They met actually in a treatment center So some people would say I was screwed from the start. Dad was an alcoholic, mom was a drug addict, and it was to me everything was normal, right? Like I would, it just wasn't far-fetched to look back and see that's how they did the best they could, right? My dad died probably when he was 53. My mom is still alive and doing well. But during that time, I always felt like out of place. I didn't feel, when I was at schools, I didn't do well. I didn't have a good memory. But I always did good on special projects or did good with group projects, right? But when it came to like doing homework and stuff like that, I always had F's. And then I came across a biology teacher named Mr. Howsky in Battle Lake. And in all the classes during parent-teacher conferences, I had F's except for his class, right? And my mom was like crying at every parent-teacher. Like every time she met a teacher, they were just like, your son is he's rebellion, he's not going to succeed in life, he needs to get a GED or something like that. And she just, I don't know, she just probably had enough. And then we met with Mr. Howsky, and I had a B in his class, and it was science, and I'm not a science, like I just don't do, like it's not my thing. And she asked him, like, why is it? And she's like, because he learns differently. He thinks differently than everyone else, and that's what I look for in our class. He's like an outside-the-box thinker. Your son's gonna be a leader one day, just no one can see it yet. And my mom started just crying because someone finally saw it, And I thought, I was just like, he's just being cool. He probably likes my mom or something, And, fast forward, I went to juvenile detention and boot camps and foster homes. Then it was jails and treatment centers and other institutions. And I was constantly surrounded by case managers and correctional officers and probation officers and judges and lawyers. And at the time, I just, I sat in jail at one time in 6-point restraints, and I had a helmet on, and I was full of blood and urine, and I puked on myself. I had warrants out for my arrest, and I got tased that night. Like it was just a bad night. And I remember sitting in that white rubber room thinking to myself, like, this is the best it's ever going to be. This is my life. It's never, ever going to get better than this. And I remembered, those little moments of Mr. Howsky's throughout my life, that they saw something different, and I could never really identify what it was. Fast forward a couple years, I end up at a good job. And it was the first time that I had a job that was like beyond what I thought I was capable of. They hired me as an outside sales rep. I had no car, no license. I was like 2 weeks sober, right? I went to the thrift store and bought a suit that was mismatched and went there, thinking that that's what executives look like. And I was wrong. I mean, they were executives, but they were North Dakota kind of good old boy executives. And so I'm the only one wearing a suit, and there was like 8 people in this interview, and I was super nervous when I went into it. And all I could remember was, I've been in situations like this, right? I've been interrogated by the police. I've had jury trials. I've had to stand before a judge and tell him why I shouldn't be going to prison, right? Except the only difference is none of these people can do anything to me, right? And it just calmed my nerves. I got the job and became successful very quickly within the next couple of years. And I didn't know anything about technology. I still to this day don't really understand what I sold, right? But I had something that I brought to the table that they were missing in the tech sector, and that was people skills, right? And I think I built it through all the times that I've been locked up in annexes where there's like 50 inmates sitting in there, and you have to like navigate through people's personalities and understand and read them, their body language and stuff. And where you're not really getting that in college or in high school or anything like that. Like it's really individualized. So that's kind of my background. A big reason that I am where I'm at today is because I had I found a guy who was in recovery, who had a room open that I rented from, and then I got a good job, and then I got transportation, and I just had these little goals, right? Got my kid back, family was really important. And you could have asked me throughout all the years, it took me 15 years to get to that point. You could have asked me every time, like, are you serious this time? Are you Like, is it going to be different this time? And I could have taken a lie detector test and it would have said, yes, it's going to be different. And it would have showed I was telling the truth every time. But there was no real effort after it, or the shiny things wore off, right? The getting my family back or getting a nice car, a house, or whatever. And I just became overwhelmed. I think the difference this time is there was a community of people around me there was a community of Mr. Houskies around me that were speaking into my life, even though they probably felt like they were like lying, you know, because of the trend that Adam always did. But it didn't matter. They just kept taking me back in every time.
Okay, so your story led you to the F5 project, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And then, but let's go back to the F5 project. Tell us about how your housing structure works with former, I guess, offenders, addicts, and inmates.
Yeah, so it's really hard to get a place to live when you're a felon, right? And there's a massive influx of people with addiction or alcoholism, basically drug or alcohol-related crimes that are going to prison, and which tells me that like it's kind of like a dog that I have in my house that I kennel because he pissed on the carpet, right? And I get mad at him and I'm like, bad dog, I leave him in the kennel, and then a couple hours later I come back, I let him out of the kennel, and he does it again, right? When I could have just let him outside. And I think that we've done the same thing for so long that if we try anything, it scares us to try something differently, right? What would it look like if we let the addict or the alcoholic or the felon outside, right? Or it would be similar to my kid gets in trouble. I put him in timeout in his room, right? And when it's time to come out, he comes to the table, all the family sitting at the table to eat, and I tell him, no, go sit at that table. You're going to eat there, right? That's his punishment, is to separate him from his family, to separate him from his community. Now imagine 10 years later, that kid comes home for Thanksgiving to sit at the table, and I stop him and I'm like, no, 10 years ago, you were put in timeout. You're supposed to sit at that table. Like, that's how I feel what the justice system, or really the government, has done, is we're completely separating a whole group of people and expecting them to do well, right? And so when it comes to housing, it just became normal. Don't rent to felons. And so what we did is we partnered with other developers and said, I have a plan. Why don't you rent it to F5 and we'll put the people in there, right? We'll create a program. Once they complete 6 months of paying their program fees, following the rules, staying sober, then we'll give them a certificate and show, because they would say, we want to rent to felons, we just don't, all we got to go off is the background. Well, now we've essentially created a whole new way of creating rental history. And so now I'm batting 1,000 with every person that gets that certificate that goes and rents from the local places. They're all getting places now.
Well, can anyone be reformed or focused toward recovery?
That's a good question.
Well, I mean, you said you took many years, so yeah, how does it work?
Personally, for me, I think anybody's life can change, right? I think first thing that we should do as a community is drop our expectations or our idea what success is, right? Like holding a person to the same standard as CEOs in the community it's just not going to work. There's different people, there's different mental health issues, there's different substance abuse issues, there's different generational family dynamics and trauma, and it's just different. And so for us, when people come to us and they say, what's your definition of success? And usually what they're asking is, can anybody do it? I think anybody can do it, but I think we meet people with where they're at and let them define what their success is. And as long as it's not like, my success is to commit crimes and become a drug dealer, like I have yet to meet anyone say that I want to be a successful drug dealer. Every single one of the guys or gals that come and live in our house say, I want to have a good job, I would like to have a reliable vehicle, and I want to get my kids back, right? That doesn't sound like criminal thinking. And not one of them said, I want to deal drugs so I can get my kids back. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so I think what we've done in America is that we've done a really good job not locking up drug dealers and locking up addicts, right? And they stay locked up because they don't have money to pay bail. They don't have money to pay for good attorneys. When we see people who are committing attempted murders that have a lot of money, or murder, or they're high-profile drug dealers, they can walk in there with all the charges in the world and pay bail and walk out the next day. Where a guy who's feeding his habit can't afford a $500 bail, and now our prisons and jails are just packed full with drug addicts.
So what happens when a resident that you have reoffends or starts using again? What do you do?
It's pretty rare for someone who's living in our house to like commit a new crime, unless it went along the lines like I just didn't find out, right? If they commit a new crime and they have to go serve time, I would say that we exit them with options, right? But they're not banned. You know what I mean? We'll exit them with options like, obviously it seems like you need a higher level of care. Chances are the new crime is they got caught with drugs, right? And so they'll either have to go to jail for a little bit or prison for a little bit, or we try to get them into treatment and then have that option for them when they come back.
Yeah. Can you talk about rethinking the landlord-tenant relationship?
Yeah, so this is probably one of the most interesting thought processes that I've had, because I come from the sales and marketing world, and I do everything for my clients, right? I go above and beyond to make sure that they have solutions, make sure that they have the right information, they're educated, all that stuff. And so that's what I was used to when I got into the housing game. And it was really interesting to watch, people who are very customer centric to people who are very I don't know what you'd call it, landlord centric, because they have all the power. You know what I mean? They can say who can live there, they can say who can't live there. You have to follow these rules, make sure these driveways are shoveled, this and that. And I've always wondered, had I had that mentality in the tech world, would I be successful, right? And so when we got into housing, it was important for me to treat our nonprofit like a for-profit. Like, we're here today because of our participants, not because we have the supply, right? We do, and the demand is in our favor, right? But that doesn't mean that we should just treat people however we want, or treat people with money better. You know what I mean? Or people with family connections better. And so what the training we do with our staff is that we meet people with where they're at, and they're the ones that are keeping us going. So let's start treating them like clients in the for-profit world and making sure that they have all the solutions, education, and services needed to have a successful life.
Have you had pushback from neighbors on your housing program?
We've had pushback from neighbors who were, I don't want to say ignorant of what we were doing, but they just didn't really understand what was going on. And so there was pushback before we opened the house. And I had some fear with oh man, what if we open the house and they come, all these NIMBYs, right, not in my backyard, come at me. And then I was like, man, I got 5 felonies on my record. I've been to jail, I've been to treatment, I've been homeless. The last thing that I was worried about was a neighbor, right? And they can't stop us from renting a place and doing what we want with it. That was kind of the original thought. And there was a little kickback from the city commission and stuff that we had too many felons living in the same place. And I was, in full transparency, I was new to the housing world. I didn't even know there were city codes when it came to housing, and I was just learning as we went. And once we found out what they were, we changed and made it more appropriate. But every single time that we've opened a house, all the neighbors that were surrounding there have reached out and talked and told us what a blessing it's been to have guys there. Mainly because they make sure all the shovels or all the driveways are shoveled. They'll go next door while they're mowing their own grass and mow their grass. It's just been a pleasure for a bunch of felons to be in that. And one of the biggest kickbacks that maybe we had originally was, I have kids, right? And there's a couple houses that we have that are near school districts, or schools. And they were like, well, what about sex offenders? What about rapists? What about whatever? And I just want, and we even had a city commissioner that came out and talked about, that we had those crimes living in our house. We don't, right? We're a reentry program basically for everybody, except for people who have violent acts towards women and children, or sexual violent acts towards women and children. or just really, really violent acts, right? Like they need a higher level of care. This is meant for the people who don't do well in homeless shelters, right? They move into a homeless shelter and it's, they know how to get a job, they know how to pay bills, they know how to do all those things, right? But they're in a situation where they don't necessarily, they're not being mentored by people who are just like them, right? And so we kind of pick some people out, put them in a house, and it's like, all right, now we're a group, we're a tribe, we're a crew, let's do this together, and they're like succeeding, which I think we're helping offload off the homeless shelters so that they can focus on the people that truly need emergency housing. You know what I mean? Like a felon who's been in prison for 10 years coming out is not emergency. They knew for 10 years they were coming out. There should have been, you know what I mean? And so we try to work with them before they get out of prison or jail so that they know about us and have a place to go rather than just walking out of the lobby and wondering, where should I go? Yeah.
But can you understand an employer's resistance to hiring felons?
Oh yeah. I understood every single time that I was told no, you know. But I also understand what it looks like when an employer takes a chance and how loyal people who never get a chance are, and the skills and the talents that they bring to the table. I went from having no experience other than serving tables at IHOP to having a very enterprise level outside sales tech job and without any real training, and became successful because I think for me, as I was willing to put forth the kind of wing it effort and just made it happen and learned as I went and made sure I had the right people around me. I don't think that's natural. I think that's something that you learn over time, how to do sales and marketing, even if you don't even know all the corporate lingo that goes with it.
Yeah. Now, how many times did it take you in order to get straight? And, you know, what about others? I mean, sometimes maybe, what triggers all that?
Yeah. It took me 15 years. The first time that I went to jail, I was 18 years old. I remember I spent my 21st birthday in jail, like I was in there before and after. And there was always this like idea that it's going to be different this time. When I get out, I'm going to get a place to live, I'm going to get my kids back, and I would be faced with homelessness, I'd be faced with no money, I'd be faced with a bunch of barriers, and I would fall back to drinking or doing drugs or whatever, mainly because the body can only go so long, or the mind can only go so long feeling like crap before it convinces you that it's time to feel good. And if there's only one solution, right, looking at it as a solution rather than it's a problem for me, it's a solution because I'm completely honest and transparent with the idea that alcohol and drugs saved my life. It prevented me from committing suicide. You know what I mean? Because you can only, like I said, go so long of feeling like that before you find something, and it prevented me from doing something very dramatic.
Yeah. Do you think the state of North Dakota and state of Minnesota, for that matter, is doing enough or not enough to stop using prison and incarceration for drug addicts?
I think that the prison system, I think the Department of Human Services, I think they have something going on really cool right now that's helping prevent recidivism. I don't think that as a state that we're doing a good job with not locking people up, but I think we're doing a good job trying to keep them out, right? If that makes sense. We have programs that was called Free Through Recovery, where we're teaming up care coordinators and peer supports to people who are coming out. But I would like to see that happen before they go to prison. You know what I mean? So it's kind of a complex answer, so I think it's 50-50.
Okay. Can you talk about some of your partners that you have, whether it's housing resources or even employers that have stepped up?
Yeah, so, excuse me. There's quite a few employers. There's some that have said, don't tell anybody that we do this, right? There's still a lot of stigma associated with it. But there's companies such as like O'Day Tanks, a lot of Wanzik, Gateway Builders, a lot of construction companies, a lot of trucking jobs, a lot of welding jobs. And it's very similar to like in Bismarck, where they have a company called Rough Rider Industries, where that's what they do, is they teach them how to do like manufacturing and sewing and stuff. Personally, I think there could be more dedicated to other industries.
Yeah. Real quick, what's your message to the community for people who are struggling and see no way forward?
Well, our motto is hustle harder. That moment when everything feels like quicksand, feels like nothing's going right, your family doesn't talk to you, you can't get a job, you can't do anything around you because you're just immobile from the depression and anxiety. Come to F5, hustle harder just a little bit longer to get to us.
Wow, good message. If people want more information, where can they go?
F5project.org or check our Facebook page.
Adam, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, that's all we have on Prairie Pulse this week. And as always, thanks for watching.
Funding provided by the members of Prairie Public.